Welcome, DSM online classmates. This is Melissa Janelle Swenson. I'll be doing my presentation on bipolar 2, and what I'll be covering in this lovely presentation is the definition of bipolar 2 as DSM perceives it. I'll also go over the definition based upon what DSM-5 states it to be. I will also go over some general statistics of bipolar 2, address the history, any current research, effective treatment, and any cross-cultural information that might be pertaining to bipolar 2. So what I'll first cover will be the definition of bipolar 2 based upon what the DSM-4 perceives it to be. So let's get started. DSM-4 states that the definition of bipolar 2 is that the patient has had at least one major depressive episode, the patient has had at least one hypomanic episode, there's had to have at least been no manic or mixed episodes. Schizoaffective disorder doesn't explain these episodes and they aren't superimposed on schizophrenia, schizophreniform disorder, delusional disorder, or psychotic disorder not otherwise specified. Thank God I'm not a doctor. I cannot enunciate these words, so bear with me. These symptoms cause clinically important distress or impair work, social functionings, or even personal functionings. Some of the important distinction between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 is the degree of disability and discomfort from the high phase that never really leads to psychosis and never really requires hospitalization within bipolar 2. So that would be the huge differentiation of diagnosing someone with bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, is that there really never is a psychosis or a hospitalization, and it's specifically hypomania rather than hypomanic or, manic or mixed episodes. So to redefine what I just said, because I got lost in it myself, is bipolar 2 is specifically hypomanic, where bipolar 1 is manic or mixed episodes. So bipolar 2 specifically refers to when a client has a recurring major depressive episode interspersed with hypomanic episode. I got to make sure I don't say manic because I don't want to confuse you or me again. And to make sure that doesn't happen, again, I actually did a visual because I'm a very visual person. So what I have here is this beautiful picture that shows a baseline, and the baseline is in red. The black line that you see is going to define the hypomanic and the major depressive episode, followed by another hypomanic with another major depressive episode. Now clearly there's another line that I've drawn on here that show the difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, since I apparently can't get the manic and hypomanic definitions straight. So we have the blue line here, which shows a more severe depiction of manic, which obviously is much more severe than a hypomanic episode, and again dips down to a major depressive episode. But when they experience their high elation, it becomes manic again rather than hypomanic, and then dips back down to the major depressive episode. So the blue would be bipolar 1, the black would be bipolar 2. Again, the differences would be that bipolar 1, you do see a manic, where bipolar 2, you only see a hypomanic. Basically, bipolar 1, when you experience the manic, you will more than likely have a psychosis or a hospitalization. Again, that's not really going to be defined by a bipolar 2. So now that we have the definition clarified, I have the DSM-5 right here just to kind of give a nice little visual, because I'm a visual person. But their definition of bipolar 2 is very similar to the DSM-4. Their criteria is that bipolar 2 have to have at least one hypomanic episode and at least one major depressive episode. There has never been a manic episode The occurrence of the hypo episodes and major depressive episodes is not better explained by the schizoaffective disorder and the rest that I can't say. And then the symptoms of depression or the unpredictability caused by frequent alternations between periods of depression and hypomania causes clinically significant distress or impairment on social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. So pretty much the same. It just uses slightly different wording. It becomes a little bit more specific within the DSM-5. It goes into very, very, very detailed description of what a major depressive episode looks like, or what a hypomanic episode looks like. So it's pretty good stuff. If you haven't gotten your DSM-5 yet, better go get it. So moving on with my presentation, some statistics that I have, just general statistics about bipolar 2, is that, remember, even though the symptoms may never really lead to hospitalization or psychosis, bipolar 2 is still a very serious condition. For example, completed suicide rates from this disorder is up to 10 to 15% based upon the TIP42. Bipolar 2 symptoms tend to occur more frequently within females than they do males, and that's again within the DSM, the TIP42, and pretty much any research that you do on bipolar will mention that. The DSM associates truancy, school failures, occupational failures, divorce, social problems, and even substance use, all associated and connected with bipolar 2. So now we're going to go over some history of bipolar 2, and I'm going to kind of base it off of the DSM, so it can make it really simple. So some of the history of bipolar 2 is that the DSM was recognized the bipolar disorder in about 1952, where it strongly was influenced by the psychodynamic approach, and that was mainly the theory that they used then. So the DSM-2 was published in 1968, and it defined the illness from a psychodynamic perspective, which we mentioned prior, that was recognized in 1952. But then the DSM-3, what it did was it replaced the psychodynamic theory with a biomedical approach. And it also replaced manic depressive disorder definition with bipolar. DSM-3R actually added subtypes, so now you're actually going to be looking at bipolar disorder mixed, manic, depressed, or not otherwise specified. And also cyclothymia. So again, another great word that I can't really pronounce. Some additional history on bipolar 2 is that when we continue on to the DSM-4 and the DSM-4-TR, they actually gave bipolar 2 a nuanced subtype system again, and the DSM-4-TR recognized that bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 are separate diagnoses. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to some current research that was found for bipolar 2. And some specific research studies such as genetics, neurochemistry, endocrinology, and immunology fields, as well as specifically, let's say, the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disorders, all relate back to bipolar being connected to biological in nature, and maybe considers it as being hereditary. So it's all associated back to the fact that bipolar 2 has a really heavy line within families. You'll not only see maybe an aunt with it, but you'll see an uncle, a son, a niece, and a nephew with it. It also shows that medical research shows that there is a diathesis stress hypothesis, and that pretty much states that people have predisposition and vulnerabilities for illnesses. And unexpected vulnerabilities then can activate bipolar as a disease. So pretty much it's saying is if you have like an autoimmune deficiency, or you're just vulnerable in that nature. Some theories state that if you have ADD as a child, that's going to predispose you to bipolar when you get older. Again, these are just theories, not really scientifically based. They're just theories. So that was some of the research that was found on bipolar 2. Some effective treatments for bipolar 2, and a lot of these are pretty standard that we hear for most illnesses, for maybe, let's say, mood stabilization and anything of that nature. So bipolar 2, you're going to be looking at antidepressants and mood stabilizers. If you're going to have an antidepressant, great. They highly recommend that you also add the mood stabilizer. You only take the antidepressant, you're going to see that person become extremely more manic. You only take the mood stabilizer, you're going to see that person become more depressed. So they definitely recommend that the antidepressant and the mood stabilizer go hand in hand. Some of those included are lithium, which is one of the more older medications that was developed specifically for bipolar. And then, again, you're going to have to excuse my enunciation of some of these horrendous words, and I apologize for annihilating every single one of them throughout this whole entire speech. Another medication would be Depakote, I believe, and it's like an alternative medication for lithium if a patient can't handle the side effects of lithium. There's a lot of other medications. I'm not going to even try pronouncing them right now. They're all on my PowerPoint, which is so much better for you to read than go through the mutilization of even trying to pronounce it. But they were typically either developed for epilepsy and then found that it elated emotions or moods or your stabilization of how you felt at that moment, and realized that because of those side effects, it would also work great in bipolar clients. And then because of that, they did more research, and there are actually newer medications out that they have for actual, not just epilepsy in itself, but also for bipolar, which is really great. Some other forms of treatment that I think a lot of us really have heard from the past and things like that would be like electroconvulsive therapy, psychotherapy, CBT, family focus therapy, interpersonal and social rhythm therapy, some basic self-support therapy that's out there is you've got the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, which we all see has a lot of resources that you can find even at Radar as well. There's tons of self-help books out there, even workbooks. There's tons of online support by chat rooms or message boards. If you pretty much Google self-help for bipolar, you're going to get a bundle full of it. So my recommendation is, if you're interested, even reading bibliographies, autobiographies, true stories, any of that good stuff about bipolar, there's tons of that goodness out there. Self-help books, it's amazing what is out there now. Again, bipolar 2 is still fairly relevant in the current terminology for a disease, as it was mentioned in my presentation that bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 were considered two separate diseases within the DSM-4. So it took a while for bipolar 2 to be recognized. But again, in general, bipolar, there is still a lot of self-help information and just overall information. So if you have any feedback about this presentation in general, actually I think I missed the culture aspect of it. Again, pretty standard stuff that we've heard before. Any barriers, language barriers, any understanding of terminology. Apparently if you saw my presentation, you would not understand a bit of it because I can't enunciate any of it. And then there's also that cultural dynamic where they perceive a mental illness as negative and therefore they disown that person. So there's a lot of that cultural aspect that can be incorporated with a diagnosis of any mental illness. So overall, now that we've covered everything in this presentation, I'm wondering what kind of questions you have for me per se. Obviously, that word you tried enunciating and I couldn't clearly quite understand you. What were you really trying to say? That would be great feedback, because I'm sure I'll even have to look back at what I was trying to say. Also, any additional research on bipolar 2 compared to bipolar 1, hit me up on that. That'd be great. Any more information on the DSM-5 and what it holds for bipolar 2, I would love to add more of that feedback on the discussion board. as well as, let's say, bipolar. What does it look like with the hypomanic versus manic? What is the difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2? Can you go in more definition on that? Great. I would love that feedback. And thank you for listening to my speech about bipolar 2 and the inconvenience of my inability to speak clearly or even enunciate some of these amazingly long and awkward terminology.